We must give Square Enix credit for having taken the Final Fantasy VII Remake project seriously, with the first chapter already out, the second announced, and the third promised. The Japanese developer could have stopped there and delivered the titles they had composed to retro gaming, the infamous compilation of Final Fantasy VII. By resurrecting the crown jewel of the compilation, Crisis Core Final Fantasy VII, Square Enix could have limited itself to a remastering for a few pennies, as happened in the past with other more or less famous titles, and instead, perhaps to reaffirm its importance in the great design of the remake itself, he almost completely redid the makeup. In our review of Crisis Core Final Fantasy VII Reunion, we will tell you if it was enough to improve a 2007 game in every aspect that today could accuse the aches and pains of passing time and the format it was originally forced into. The Final Fantasy VII compilation aimed to explore some aspects of the imaginary of Final Fantasy VII by telling what had happened before, during, and after the events of the famous JRPG Square Enix. It included a plethora of productions, from the disappointing dirge of Cerberus starring Vincent Valentine to the feature film Advent Children that served as a gloss to the original video game. But the most important of all was Crisis Core, precisely because it told the story of Zack Fair, a key character who in Final Fantasy VII was little seen for a whole series of reasons that could spoil the surprise for those who have not yet played the '97 JRPG or its recent remake. The way things have turned out in the remake, you could play this Crisis Core Final Fantasy VII Reunion even before. But if you are completely new to Final Fantasy VII, and you want to get closer to this imaginary through the original JRPG, then we recommend to play Crisis Core only after finishing it. Square Enix has redesigned practically every character, giving them more realistic features than in the past, not only in the features, but also in the animations and 3D models. It's a change that immediately catches the eye with Zack. If you played the original Crisis Core, in which the protagonist owed a lot to his Kingdom Hearts counterpart, but fans of the remake will notice it especially when he enters the scene. By Yuffie, Aerith, and Tifa. Even the characters, such as Angeal and Genesis, have been partially modified, despite not having assets in the remake, while even more has been done for the creatures recalled from the summoning materials. Given that the artists of Square Enix have completely redesigned those in common with the remake, like Ifrit or Bahamut, and refined all the others. The intent is clear, to standardize the stylistic imprint of the two works in a solution of continuity, so that Reunion is in effect the Crisis Core of reference for the new generations or for those who quite simply have never had the opportunity to play it, perhaps because he didn't own a PSP. The points of contact between Reunion and Remake are many, and not only in the reshuffle of the graphics, which affect, in addition to the 3D models, also the general resolution, the level of detail in the scenarios, the effects and lighting, completely reprogrammed. Reunion borrows some musical tracks from the remake, while others have been rearranged and still others remixed by Takeru Ishimoto himself, who has returned to sign a more modern soundtrack close to the spirit of the remake. In this sense, Square Enix has also worked on the interface, which in the structure, design, and fonts is not a little reminiscent of that of the remake. We start with the tutorials that appear in the middle of the screen, but each menu or screen is now more readable and spacious than in the 2007 PSP version. And that would have been enough to promote this revival, which we played on PlayStation 5, and for which we can also confirm the goodness of the performance, which was not at all obvious if we consider these technical reworking. In our test, we did not encounter any fluidity problems. Reunion travels at 60 frames per second. And with its resolution Ultra HD at first glance it seems like a modern title, only betrayed by the attentive eye of those who will recognize a certain awkwardness in the movements and modeling of some minor enemy or NPCs, which Square Enix has surprisingly voiced even for the most banal of dialogues. Square Enix could have reproposed Crisis Core with a new graphic design and closed it there. Instead, it also put its hand on the gameplay, rejuvenating it of all those more controversial aspects that had characterized it in its first release to align it with the much more action philosophy of the remake. In the PSP version, the player chose the basic attack and skills or spells associated with equipped mates from a horizontal list, while moving around the battlefield and dodging enemy blows with a small somersault. Square Enix has substantially remapped the control system, handing over camera control, one of the original's worst flaws, to the handy analog stick, while Zack is controlled with the other. Attack is now associated with a key of its own, just like dodging, while the player can call upon the powers of equipped yellow and green materia through simple key combinations. This new configuration exponentially improves the gameplay of Crisis Core, bringing it closer to that of the remake. Controlling Zack is much more intuitive and satisfying, and some new dynamics, such as the one that enhances any matter recalled at the end of the combo of simple attacks, though the indicator that the player can empty to weaken or just cancel the most powerful attacks of the bosses, rewards a more aggressive, but still reasoned approach. All this would have been useless, however, if Square Enix hadn't tweaked the OMD system, the cross and delight of the title directed by Hajime Tabata. On paper, an ingenious crossing of gameplay and narrative, the OMD system, which stands for Brain Mental Wave, ended up being the archenemy of the player. And not because it regulated bonus, summons, or over-the-limit attacks based on pure chance, but because it slowed down or interrupted the rhythm of the clash with his slot machine. The OMD system works something like this. A slot machine spins continuously, lining up scores and shapes that belong to the characters Zack has known. The best combinations guarantee temporary bonuses, allow you to use the most powerful summons or attacks, and if Zack has reached a certain threshold of experience points, they also trigger the usual level up of the character or his materials. It's always the OMD who sometimes pauses the fights to show flashbacks that delve into the relationships between Zack and the other characters, and you have to play a lot to maximize each link. But if in the PSP version most of the positive alignments temporarily froze the clash, in Reunion this almost never happens. It only happens on a few occasions, and the slot machine sits quietly in its top left corner for most of the time, without disturbing the action. There is also to say that the lightning-fast uploads guaranteed by the Sony hardware, on which we tested the game, they help to perceive greater smoothness in the clashes. Even when a summon or a beyond-the-limit attack pauses the fight to show the related scene, which fortunately we can also skip by pressing a key or deactivate directly from the options menu. In short, in Reunion this gameplay dynamic remains controversial but much less irritating than in the past, and still represents a bizarre but original way of connecting gameplay with narrative. Aside from the changes to the combat system and OMD, Crisis Core Final Fantasy VII Reunion is still the same game it was in 2007, and that means that it carries an ancient structure that recalls its mobile origins. In fact, the 11 chapters of the adventure take place in macro zones, in turn divided into rooms that the game must load from time to time. And although it takes very few seconds, in the long run this structure can be unpleasant. Although the exploration functions more or less like in Final Fantasy VII Remake, Zack can interact with NPCs, acquire information. The bulk of the side quests, however, are listed in a side quest screen accessible from save points. And that's where Crisis Core asserts its mobile DNA. They are very short missions, designed to be nibbled. The player can check their general difficulty, as well as any rewards, before accepting them. But then he is teleported to an arena or a maze of identical corridors and rooms where he can fight enemies until achievement of the goal. Square Enix hasn't made any changes to this aspect of the game, which remains heavily repetitive and lackluster even with all the improvements we've described above. Even with a more than fair variety of enemies, and with an interesting level of customization, which is expressed in the fusion of materials and in finding the best accessories. Often rewards of secondary missions, Reunion still stumbles over the secondary content which, even in this incarnation, especially challenges the completionists and the most tenacious players. Unfortunately, we are also talking about the bulk of the game's content. The campaign is completed in 15 hours to be generous, and if we exclude the various iconic moments, such as the meeting with Aerith or the memorable ending, that reinforce the story of Final Fantasy VII. The subplots that Crisis Core opens, and does not always close, are not particularly exciting, above all because of some really eccentric supporting actors, among which the plurivituperato Genesis Repsodo stands out. The narrative, which however is well diluted in the course of the adventure, serves to better frame certain aspects of Final Fantasy VII and to understand its complicated mythology. Crisis Core, for example, explores the character of Sephiroth and the implications of the Soldier Project such as few other titles in the franchise. And the commitment that Square Enix has lavished on the realization of this reunion suggests that it is really important for the development of the remake project. And that's it. I hope this review was helpful for you. But if you enjoyed this video, then leave a like and subscribe to the channel to support me. Leave a comment down below with your thoughts. As always, until next time, take it easy.